The governor rolls out his annual budget and gets the usual pushback from Republicans.
Our future is bright and opportunity lies ahead.
Why do we have to always have a budget that grows every year?
That's coming up on WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. Good evening, I'm John Norton. On today's show, a lawmaker from Bloomington likes what she heard from the governor.
Education is sort of the big winner, I think, here.
Plus, Rivian slashes its salaried workforce.
These difficult decisions enable us to maximize the amount of impact we can have as a company.
And ISU's new faculty union gets ready to negotiate its first labor deal.
One of the outcomes of this will be a fair contract.
Those stories follow a Bloomington Normal News update just ahead. This is Sound Ideas on 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.
Support for WGLT comes from Bloomington Normal Audiology. Hear My Story continues with local patient Paul Brandt.
They're really, really good. I'm just accustomed to having them on. I can watch TV with my wife now, and we can set the volume where it's okay for her and it's great for me.
Paul's full story can be found at bnaudiology.com.
From the campus of Illinois State University in Normal, this is WGLT's news magazine, Sound Ideas. I'm John Norton. Illinois lawmakers are now on the clock to consider J.B. Pritzker's proposed $53 billion budget. He presented it to a statewide audience yesterday. Pritzker wants to put more money toward education and child welfare while continuing to care for the influx of migrants. Not everyone is sold on this plan. We begin with IPR's Alex Degman.
Governor Pritzker had a strong message for those who question Illinois' trajectory.
Do not let the doom grifters steal your optimism about what's ahead for Illinois. Our future is bright and opportunity lies ahead.
Opportunities that start with Illinois' children. Pritzker wants to spend an additional $450 million next year on K-12 education. Much of that comes from a $350 million increase following the evidence-based funding formula. There's also money allocated for a statewide literacy program and grants to help hire more teachers. This is the second year of the governor's pre-K Smart Start initiative. This year, Pritzker wants to spend $400 million, which would, among other things, open another 5,000 preschool spots statewide.
Right now, we have over 82,000 publicly funded preschool classroom seats, the highest number in our state's history. And staying on the Smart Start plan, we will achieve universal preschool by 2027.
The governor also wants to spend $182 million from the Department of Human Services budget next year to help provide shelter, health care, and other services for migrants being sent to Chicago and the surrounding suburbs.
Maybe some of you think that we should just say, this is not our problem, and that we should let the migrant families starve or freeze to death. But that's not what decent Midwesterners do. We didn't ask for this manufactured crisis, but we must deal with it all the same.
Pritzker suggests spending $440 million on the programs offering health care to immigrant adults and seniors 42 or older, which is less than this year. Undocumented immigrants are eligible, not asylum seekers who are covered under federal programs. Republicans generally aren't supporting this plan, with many saying they don't want a budget that spends hundreds of millions on non-Illinois citizens. But they're more complimentary than usual. House Republican leader Tony McCombie says there are good things, like fully funding both education and this year's pension payment. But
the bad part is that we're going to have $910 million in tax increases.
The governor's office puts that number around $827 million. He didn't mention it in the speech, but Pritzker is proposing a 20% hike to the sports wagering tax from 15% to 35%. He also wants to cap certain corporate income tax benefits and limit benefits that discount retailers get. But there could also be some tax cuts, like a modest child tax credit for low to middle income families with children 3 or younger, and permanently getting rid of the 1% grocery tax.
It's one more regressive tax that we just don't need. Even if it only puts a few $100 back in families' pockets, it's the right thing to do.
That proposal caught Republican State Senator Jill Tracy off guard. It's a Republican idea that she supported for years. But she wanted more, perhaps property tax relief or reducing the gasoline tax. Somehow, she says, the budget keeps growing year after year.
There was just a total focus of increasing this budget, the largest in Illinois history, why do we have to always have a budget that grows every year?
Now, the next phase begins as lawmakers analyze the governor's plan and come up with ideas of their own. The goal is to present him a budget toward the end of May when they're scheduled to adjourn. I'm Alex Degman.
And I'm John Norton here on Sound Ideas. Now, a conversation with Democratic State Representative Sharon Chung, who spoke with WGLT's Charlie Slinker and says there's a lot she likes about the governor's spending plan.
You know, the governor is putting a lot of investments into education. K through 12, we're still, doing the evidence-based funding. And then in terms of also early childhood education with his Smart Start program. And then now we're sort of adding in investments also into higher education, which I'm personally really excited about to see. So, those sorts of, I think education is sort of the big, the big winner, I think, here. And I think it's just goes along with the message he's been making for years. We have to invest in education, and then people will hopefully want to stay in the state and get good jobs and that pay living wages. It all starts from birth, basically.
So you're happy about the $150 million in the second year of the Smart Start initiative?
I am. I guess as we see, like when it comes to hard numbers, we'll have to see where we all go and how the negotiating goes. We have a bit of a shortfall here this year. There's a lot of costs that we did not really see happening last year that we had to kind of deal with. And now the issue is still sort of happening this year. So I guess we'll just have to see where we can make some compromises and where negotiating happens. I guess I'm the sort of the mind that anything can be negotiated.
So since it is so tight and choices are hard, do you believe the state can afford the governor's proposal to eliminate the grocery sales tax and the revenue that generates?
That is one of the things that he mentioned that everybody on both sides of the aisle stood up and clapped for. So to me, I guess if it's got such wide bipartisan support, that maybe seems like one of those things that we can maybe really try to work on to try and bring that together. It was very striking because when I saw them all stand up on the other side of the aisle, I thought, oh, wow, well, this is very popular.
You mentioned the governor's support for higher education and called that a win. Certainly the extra $45 million proposed for a teacher pipeline program is significant. But the $30 million increase for the rest of higher education operating money, which is what the public colleges and universities get, when spread out over all of those, that's not very much. And in fact, that would be going backwards after inflation. So how is that a win?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of sort of talking about making those investments where, maybe we did not always make those investments, we'll see. I think that's always sort of positive for me. What we're also looking forward to, there's a task force that's been discussing equitable funding for public colleges and universities in the state. I believe they're releasing their findings sometime in the next month or so. That's something we're really excited about, to see where that is and then to see how we're going to move forward with that and to see, where the greater need is in different parts around the state.
There had been some hope that task force report would provide support or backing for the notion that higher education should be getting a per-student funding formula, much as K-12 does. Do you think that will be in there?
Again, that's something we'll have to look at when it comes down to like going through things line by line by line.
Is that idea gaining currency among lawmakers? It's floated around, but never achieved the action stage.
I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. I think and I'm not going to lie, I think it's going to be a really rough year for the budget. People are going to have to make some concessions here and there. But in terms of, how I believe like Speaker Welch sort of manages and wrangles the caucus, we come to him with different sorts of initiatives, things that we do really care about. They've sort of taken polls. And so in different sub caucuses that I'm part of as well, we've sort of set out our budget priorities as well. I think they take all of that into account. What
were your priorities when you had to do that exercise?
Oh my goodness. There's at least for me, I've always been really a big champion of education and public education. So those are always sort of priorities for me. Things that we can do to keep healthcare costs down. Those are other things. And then I think also in terms of like workforce development, it kind of maybe goes along the education route too, but those are things that I've really sort of cared about and talked a lot about. We have a lot of really great social service agencies, and just to make sure that they're also getting the funding that they need to be able to continue doing that work. Those I know are going to be really hard discussions that we're going to have.
That's State Representative Sharon Chung, who represents parts of Bloomington Normal. She spoke with WGLT's Charlie Schlenker.
Two years into Russia's war on Ukraine.
Attention, air raid alert.
Danger in places like Kharkiv is never far away. Still, many are determined to stay. That's tomorrow on Morning Edition from NPR News.
This is Steve Inskeep. Listen to Morning Edition weekdays from 4 to 9 a.m. on WGLT.
Stories and conversations around Bloomington Normal and McLean County. This is WGLT's Sound Ideas. The electric automaker Rivian plans to cut 10% of its salaried workers, citing challenging macroeconomic conditions. That news emerged from the company's latest quarterly earnings report. WGLT's Ryan Denham is following the development and is here in studio to fill us in. Thanks for stopping by, Ryan.
Sure thing, John.
So Rivian's cutting jobs. Do we know how that impacts Rivian's workers right here in Normal?
Well, I don't expect it to be significant. Rivian won't break down the numbers exactly, so we don't know for sure. But the vast majority of the 8,000 workers here in Normal doing manufacturing work are hourly workers. So they're not in that salaried bucket. If they're cutting 10% of salaried workers and we don't have as many salaried workers here, you would guess the number would be relatively low. It's more likely that those cuts are going to be impacting the company's other 8,000 workers in places like California and Michigan.
Okay, so what do we know about why they're making these cuts right now?
Well, again, I mean, it might be a smaller number than we think it is. I mean, of the company's 16,000 employees, only 10% of the salaried portion are being cut. Of course, I mean, the company has cash. It has over $9 billion in cash and cash equivalents. Total liquidity is just above that, but it is still losing money, and it's got some pretty big spending plans, including a $5 billion manufacturing plant in Georgia. Some of these cuts may also be like a signal to Wall Street and to investors that, hey, we see the hesitation in the demand for electric vehicles in the U.S. right now. We're not oblivious to that. We see other automakers preparing for a slower year with demand for EVs. So let's signal that we can be lean too. That might be part of it.
Well, let's talk about that. Why have there been so many negative headlines about electric vehicles recently?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of them.
Yeah.
From Hertz, like the rental car company, was selling off a bunch of its EVs. Ford was slashing production of the F-150 electric version. GM was pulling back on its investment. Even Tesla, like the big electric company, was warning its investors that a pretty quiet year was coming up. So there's this demand issue. How much demand is there for EVs? Right now, interest rates are high, which makes it more expensive to buy a car. And the early adopters, the people who were going to buy EVs at the get-go, they've already bought them, right? So now it's like the mainstream buyers making decisions, and they're pretty sensitive to the interest rates and costs, right? So NPR's Camilla Domanowski is their reporter who covers the automotive industry, and she put it this way a couple of weeks ago, which I really liked. To the extent that all of this is prompting a reckoning, it's over the pace of the journey to electrification, not the destination itself.
Okay, so let's bring it closer to home again. How has Rivian, in light of all that, changed its own strategy?
It's doing a lot of cost cutting, a lot of things to make it cheaper to build the vehicles in the first place, trying to find efficiencies. These job cuts announced yesterday would be part of that. It's things like rolling out a new motor that they make in-house at the plant in Normal, which is cheaper. This spring, they're going to be shutting the plant down for a couple of weeks to make some pretty significant changes to supplier and component parts. Again, all aimed at like lowering how much it costs to build a vehicle. The end result of that is going to be overall production capacity at the plant is going to go up 30%. Even if for a few weeks this spring, they're not going to be making vehicles. Here's Rivian Chief Financial Officer Claire McDonough explaining how all of these dots connect.
While the incorporation of new design changes impacts near-term production, we are confident it better positions Rivian to be more profitable and competitive over the long term.
They're also just like narrowing their focus and prioritizing what they call growth areas. Like the big one coming up is in 2 weeks, they're going to be debuting kind of the design of the R2. So everything they make here in Normal is the R1, like Model 1. And what's coming next in 2 weeks is the R2. That's the cheaper, smaller SUV that's going to be built in Georgia, where Rivian is building a new plant. And importantly, it's going to be the first Rivian that is going to be sold globally. So even if demand for EVs is soft in the US, it might not be overseas at that time. So Rivian founder and CEO RJ Scaringe was asked about the strength of the shakiness of EV demand point blank on yesterday's earnings call.
We do think we're in a very interesting moment in time where there is a lack of choice of highly compelling EV products in that $45,000 to $55,000 price range. Recognizing the average price of a new vehicle transaction in the United States last year was around $48,000.
So that's RJ Scaringe, the CEO and founder of Rivian. Ryan Denham is in studio here on WGLT Sound Ideas. Ryan, I think I've asked you this a couple of times, but Rivian, spending a lot of money. It's not really turning a profit yet. Is there any idea when that could happen?
You are correct. Rivian is losing money, but just like EV pioneer Tesla did in its early years. I think it took about 18 years for Tesla to turn a full year profit. So yesterday's earnings call was just for the fourth quarter of 2023, so October, November, December. Rivian posted a net loss of $1.5 billion in that fourth quarter, which is a little bit more than what you make in a year, John. But quarterly revenue, though, so the amount of money they're bringing in from selling vehicles and other things, basically doubled, up to $1.3 billion. And Rivian says it expects to achieve what it calls a modest gross profit in the fourth quarter at the end of this year of 2024.
That's WGLT's Ryan Denham, who has been covering Rivian for us for many years now. Ryan, thanks for joining us in studio and giving us this update.
Sure thing, John.
You can read more on this story and find a link to Rivian's shareholder letter that was released yesterday at WGLT.org. This is Sound Ideas on WGLT. I'm John Norton. Tenured and tenured track faculty at ISU are officially unionized. The United Faculty of ISU was recognized by the State Educational Relations Board in January, and the union begins negotiating with the university on its first contract next week. WGLT's Lindsay Jones spoke with union member and associate professor Mark Zivlaki about the years-long effort to organize.
Despite our best efforts, we didn't reach every single faculty member, but we reached a vast majority of them. And, there were several of us, we have a saying that many hands make light work. So we had, a lot of folks, having these conversations and one-on-one conversations. And I think a couple of things came out of that. One was that we really kind of broke out of our silos a little bit. We have 7 colleges, numerous departments. And it was interesting to hear some of the same issues coming up over and over, no matter what department we went into, or we were, who we were talking to. And then I think the secondly was it was just really a great way to establish a strong network by developing these relationships, across colleges and across departments.
What were some of those issues that kept coming up in those conversations with other faculty members?
Some of the big issues that came up were, number one, were salary and compensation, so being able to get steady raises, cost of living increases, and dealing with salary compression. That's when faculty wages stagnate. So what happens is, somebody who may have been here for 20 years might only be making just a little bit more than somebody who was recently hired. If raises are not sort of keeping pace with, the market value of incoming employees, that's kind of what happens is you see very kind of a shrinkage of the difference between salaries. And then salary inversion happens when it's kind of taking it to the extreme where somebody gets hired at a higher salary than somebody who's been there for a number of years. So those are, issues that we are, planning to, talk about and negotiate on.
Is there a sense that other universities are more competitive with faculty salaries than ISU might be?
Well, one thing we learned that we were amongst the lowest paid faculty in the state. And I think one of the outcomes of this will be a fair contract that is comparable with other state institutions.
Did you expect that when you heard that?
No, I did not. I was a little bit surprised, but then we looked at the numbers and I was like, yeah, okay. So I think that was, that was a driving issue as well. And together, we've joined the University Professionals of Illinois 4100. It's our local. It also includes 7 other universities. So that will also kind of, I think, enhance our collective power, especially at the state level, where we ISU has been underfunded in per pupil expenditures for a long time. In talks with some state legislators, we're hoping to advocate for a higher level of funding.
Any other issues on the minds of faculty and union members?
The second was workload. We have a lot of faculty members, almost 80% said they were working more than 40 hours a week, with a third of those saying they were working more than 50 hours a week. And it really impacted their ability to do research. So if we're kind of shifting to a more research-focused institution, that's something that'll be faculty workload will be need to be taken into consideration.
Is that overload due to a tension between teaching and research or other responsibilities?
There's an overload of expectations, in teaching, research, and service, and that can vary by department because everybody has their own ways that they evaluate faculty. But yeah, so I think that the biggest concern is an overload of teaching and service requirements, which really hamper the ability of faculty to do the research that they really want to do.
When you gave a public comment about the union to the Board of Trustees at a meeting last week, you mentioned something about student mental health being an important advocacy point. Can you say more about that?
Right. Well, faculty are the first contact that many students have with this institution. So if they're unable to access resources on campus, like mental health services or wellness, they may come to faculty, and faculty most of us are not trained in how to, address mental health issues with students. So, when we hear stories about them having to wait for 2 months for an appointment, and not being able to get in, if there was a potential crisis situation, it's concerning. And, we believe that, as a faculty union, we can better advocate to get those resources for student mental health and wellness, as well as other support services that they might need.
Any other issues besides seeing mental health services be bolstered?
And then the third thing was workplace health and safety, and I did mention about the student mental health, but we also learned that a little more than half of our members had witnessed or experienced workplace bullying or discrimination, and we are wanting to strengthen the grievance process so that faculty feel that they have a way to get accountability and to be protected from that.
That was ISU faculty union member and Associate Professor Mark Zablocki speaking with WGLT's Lindsay Jones. And that's Sound Ideas today. WGLT's news magazine is made possible in part by Bloomington Normal Audiology. I'm John Norton. Story help today from WGLT's Charlie Schlenker, Lindsay Jones, and Ryan Denham in studio. Also, a thank you and a big shout out to our student audio producer editor, Ryan Toohey, on this Birds Give Back Day. Ryan, thanks for editing Sound Ideas superbly every single day. This is 89.1 WGLT and WGLT.org, part of the NPR network.